20 years ago, at the height of his fame, Mel Gibson said something that many people ignored. In interviews, he hinted that Hollywood was not the glamorous world the public believed it to be. He once admitted, "No matter how strong you are, this place will affect you. If you hold on to the anger, it will eat you alive." At the time, his words sounded like the frustration of a controversial star. But years later, major scandals involving powerful producers, hidden abuse, and secret networks began shaking the industry. Suddenly, old interviews started resurfacing online. Was Mel Gibson simply speaking out of anger? Or was he warning people about something deeper? Before we uncover the story, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts below. Long before controversy surrounded his name, Mel Gibson was one of the most powerful figures in Hollywood. By the mid-1990s, he was not only a global movie star, but also an Academy Award-winning director. His film Braveheart had just swept the Oscars, earning 5 awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. At that moment, Gibson stood at the very top of the industry. Yet even during those years of enormous success, Gibson occasionally spoke about Hollywood in a way that sounded different from most actors. He did not describe it simply as a glamorous world of opportunity. Instead, he hinted that surviving in the industry required a certain toughness, almost like enduring a hostile environment. In one interview reflecting on life inside Hollywood, Gibson explained it bluntly. "No matter how strong you are going to be affected by this place. You'll resent it for a while, and then you have to let it go. Otherwise, you'll eat yourself alive here." The comment sounded strange coming from someone who seemed to have everything. At the time, Gibson was one of the most bankable actors on the planet. Studios trusted him with enormous budgets, and audiences around the world filled theaters to watch his films. But Gibson's relationship with Hollywood had always been slightly different from most of his peers. Unlike many actors who spend years climbing the ladder within the Los Angeles system, Gibson's path to fame began far away from it. His family moved from New York to Australia when he was young, and he trained as an actor there. His rise to international fame happened almost unexpectedly through the film Mad Max, which turned him into a global star before he had even set foot inside the traditional Hollywood network. Because of that unusual path, Gibson entered the industry already successful. He did not depend on powerful studio executives or industry insiders to launch his career. That independence may have allowed him to notice things others ignored. Years later, Gibson reflected on the mindset required to survive in the entertainment world. He once described the industry using a striking metaphor. "It takes a kind of cockroach resilience to survive in this town." The remark revealed how he viewed Hollywood, not simply as a creative community, but as a competitive system where people had to adapt or risk being pushed out. At the time, most audiences paid little attention to these comments. Gibson was known for his humor and his sometimes blunt personality, so many people treated his remarks as casual observations rather than warnings. But when old interviews are revisited today, they sound slightly different. Some observers now wonder whether Gibson was hinting at something deeper, something he had begun to notice while navigating the highest levels of the industry. Because even during his most successful years, he occasionally suggested that Hollywood operated according to rules that were never openly discussed. Rules that determined who rose to power and who disappeared from the spotlight. And according to Gibson, understanding those rules was the key to survival. By the late 1990s, Mel Gibson had already spent enough time inside Hollywood to start forming his own opinions about how the industry worked. On the surface, everything looked glamorous. Red carpets, blockbuster films, award ceremonies, and enormous financial success. But behind that polished image, Gibson hinted that there were things happening that outsiders rarely understood. In a 1998 interview with Playboy, Gibson revealed a moment that raised eyebrows. While discussing his experiences working with producers in the film industry, he described a comment that had stuck with him. According to Gibson, one producer summarized his philosophy about women in movies in a disturbingly blunt way. Women in film, either naked or dead, both is better. The remark was shocking, but Gibson presented it almost casually, as if it were simply one example of a mentality that existed within certain corners of Hollywood. He admitted that moments like that made him uneasy. There were situations he witnessed that didn't make sense at the time. Things he couldn't fully explain, but that left him with a growing sense that the industry operated in ways most people never saw. Looking back on those early impressions, Gibson described the feeling as a kind of creeping suspicion. You know, I had a whole bunch of weird paranoid suspicions about what the hell was going on, because there was a lot of stuff I couldn't understand. At first, he questioned himself. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe the strange atmosphere he sometimes felt around certain people was simply the result of stress or misunderstanding. Gibson explained how he tried to rationalize those feelings. You think to yourself, surely that can't be true. A whole place can't be like that. But the longer he stayed in the industry, the more those suspicions returned. Hollywood, he suggested, sometimes felt like a strange town where newcomers were quietly expected to follow rules that were never openly explained. A place where power relationships determined opportunities and where challenging those relationships could have consequences. Gibson described the social dynamics in a way that hinted at an unspoken agreement among people working in the business. You can't get mad. You can't let it get to you, because you have to make a deal with everyone else. According to him, there was an understanding that people would eventually disappoint each other. Promises would be broken. Alliances would shift. And those who wanted to remain inside the system had to learn how to navigate that reality without openly challenging it. At the time, these comments did not create major headlines. Gibson was known for speaking bluntly, and most people assumed he was simply sharing personal frustrations about life in a competitive industry. But years later, when major scandals began exposing hidden abuses of power within Hollywood, some of those old interviews started circulating again online. People began revisiting the words Gibson had spoken decades earlier. And some wondered whether the strange suspicions he described were not paranoia at all, but early glimpses of a system that few outsiders truly understood. By the early 2000s, Mel Gibson had reached a point in his career where he could attempt projects that most filmmakers would never even propose. But the film he began developing in 2002 would quickly become one of the most controversial projects Hollywood had seen in years. The film was The Passion of the Christ. From the beginning, Gibson made it clear that this would not be a typical Hollywood production. The story would focus entirely on the final hours of Jesus' life. Even more unusual, Gibson planned to shoot the film using two ancient languages, Aramaic and Latin. At first, he even considered releasing the film without subtitles. When Gibson began meeting with major studios to present the project, the reaction was immediate. One after another, the largest companies in Hollywood declined to participate. Fox, Universal, Warner Brothers, Disney, none of them wanted to finance the film. Part of the hesitation was commercial. Studios doubted that audiences would watch a film entirely spoken in ancient languages. But there were deeper concerns as well. Before a single scene had been filmed, criticism began building around the project. The Anti-Defamation League obtained an early copy of the script and publicly raised concerns about how the story portrayed the crucifixion of Jesus. Their national director warned that the film might reinforce accusations historically used to blame Jews for the death of Christ. The controversy began spreading through the media. At the same time, Gibson's own public reputation was starting to attract scrutiny. His father had previously expressed controversial views about historical events, and critics began questioning Gibson about his own beliefs. Pressure around the project intensified. As the debate grew louder, studios became even more cautious. Financing for the film disappeared almost overnight. In Hollywood terms, the project was essentially dead. But Gibson made a decision that surprised the industry. Instead of abandoning the film, he chose to fund it himself. He invested approximately $45 million of his own money into the production, even mortgaging personal property to complete the project. If the film failed, the financial consequences would fall entirely on him. When the movie finally premiered in February 2004, the reaction was explosive. Critics were sharply divided. Some described the film as powerful and deeply emotional. Others condemned its graphic violence and controversial themes. Outside certain theaters, protests formed. At the same time, audiences were lining up in extraordinary numbers. The film opened with $83 million in its first weekend, an enormous figure for a religious film. Over the following months, it went on to earn more than $600 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing R-rated film in history at the time. For Hollywood, the success was shocking. Gibson had produced a massive global hit without the backing of any major studio. He had effectively bypassed the entire system. Years later, reflecting on the reaction within the industry, Gibson recalled the moment with a mixture of surprise and amusement. There was this kind of thing in town. They said, "Did anyone just see what that guy did? Can't let that guy do that again." The film had proven that it was possible to succeed in Hollywood without playing by its usual rules. And for some people inside the industry, that may have made Gibson even more controversial than before. The enormous success of The Passion of the Christ placed Mel Gibson in a unique position inside Hollywood. He had just produced one of the most profitable films in modern cinema without relying on the traditional studio system. But within only a few years, everything began to collapse. In July 2006, Gibson was stopped by police in Malibu for driving under the influence of alcohol. What might have been a routine arrest quickly became a national controversy when reports emerged about the statements he made during the incident. According to the arrest report, Gibson directed offensive remarks toward the arresting officer and made derogatory comments about Jewish people. The story spread rapidly across television, newspapers, and online media. Within days, the scandal dominated headlines around the world. Gibson soon released a public apology. In the statement, he acknowledged that he had been struggling with alcoholism and accepted responsibility for his behavior. He pleaded no contest to a misdemeanor DUI charge and was sentenced to probation, along with mandatory counseling. Reflecting later on the incident, Gibson described the experience as a moment of personal reckoning. Because you're dealing with a malady of the soul, an obsession of the mind, and a physical allergy, some people need a big tap on the shoulder. In my case, public humiliation on a global scale seems to be what was required. Despite the apology, the damage to his reputation was immediate. Studios began distancing themselves from him. Projects associated with his name faced delays or cancellations. His image in the media shifted almost overnight from celebrated filmmaker to controversial figure. But the situation did not end there. In 2010, another major scandal erupted when recordings of phone calls between Gibson and his then partner were leaked to the public. The tapes contained disturbing arguments, including threatening language and inflammatory remarks. One moment from the recording became particularly infamous when Gibson angrily told her, "You look like a pig in heat, and if you get raped by a pack of them, it will be your fault." The audio recording spread rapidly across television and the internet. Media outlets replayed segments repeatedly, and public reaction intensified. Legal consequences soon followed. A restraining order was issued, preventing Gibson from contacting his partner and their daughter, and the controversy surrounding the recordings dominated news coverage for weeks. The combined impact of these events shattered Gibson's career. Between 2006 and 2016, he appeared in only a handful of films. For nearly a decade, major studios avoided working with him altogether. Hollywood had effectively closed its doors. For some critics, the scandals confirmed what they already believed about Gibson. For others, the scale of the backlash raised new questions about how the industry responded to controversy. Because while Gibson's career was collapsing, other powerful figures inside Hollywood continued working, despite facing serious allegations of their own. And that comparison would soon become a major part of the conversation surrounding his story. As Mel Gibson's career collapsed following the scandals of 2006 and 2010, a larger conversation began emerging around Hollywood itself. Some people argued that Gibson's downfall was entirely justified. Others began noticing something different: the way the industry seemed to treat different controversies very differently. Around the same time Gibson was being pushed out of Hollywood, several powerful figures inside the film industry continued working despite serious accusations that had followed them for years. One of the most striking examples would emerge later with producer Harvey Weinstein. For decades, rumors had circulated quietly throughout Hollywood about Weinstein's behavior toward actresses. Stories were whispered at parties and hinted at in private conversations. Yet his influence inside the industry remained enormous. It was not until 2017 that those allegations exploded into public view, when dozens of women came forward accusing Weinstein of sexual assault and abuse. The revelations triggered the global #MeToo movement, exposing how powerful individuals had been able to control careers and silence victims for years. Looking back, some people began revisiting earlier comments from celebrities who had hinted that something was wrong inside the industry. Years before the scandal broke, a moment from a red carpet interview with musician Courtney Love had resurfaced online. When asked if she had advice for young actresses entering Hollywood, she responded carefully. "If Harvey Weinstein invites you to a private party in the Four Seasons, don't go." The comment, made more than a decade before the accusations became public, suddenly seemed much more serious in hindsight. Weinstein was not the only example that fueled debate about Hollywood's standards. Director Roman Polanski had pleaded guilty in 1977 to unlawful sexual conduct with a minor before fleeing the United States. Despite this, decades later he continued receiving recognition from the film industry. In 2003, when he won the Academy Award for Best Director, the audience at the Oscars gave him a standing ovation. Other controversial figures also continued working in the industry while facing accusations or legal settlements. These comparisons led some observers to question whether Hollywood applied its moral standards consistently. Why did some individuals continue receiving opportunities despite serious allegations, while others were rapidly pushed out? One explanation, suggested by critics, was that the industry often responds not simply to the severity of an action, but to how publicly damaging the scandal becomes. Mel Gibson's controversies had exploded across global media. His statements had been recorded, replayed, and discussed everywhere. In a world where public image matters enormously, the controversy surrounding him had become impossible for studios to ignore. As a result, distancing themselves from Gibson became the safest choice for many companies. The debate over these double standards intensified after the #MeToo movement revealed just how widespread abuses of power had been within Hollywood for decades. And as these revelations spread, some people began looking again at the earlier warnings and suspicions that certain actors, including Gibson, had expressed years before the scandals finally reached the headlines. After the scandals that erupted between 2006 and 2010, Mel Gibson found himself in a position that few Hollywood stars had experienced before. Only a few years earlier, he had been one of the most powerful filmmakers in the world. Now, studios avoided him, and major projects disappeared. For nearly a decade, Gibson's presence in Hollywood was dramatically reduced. Between 2006 and 2016, he appeared in very few films. One of the most notable was Edge of Darkness in 2010, a thriller about a man who uncovers a conspiracy involving powerful institutions covering up crimes. The story followed a character willing to risk everything to expose the truth. Whether intentional or not, the role seemed to mirror how some supporters viewed Gibson himself, a controversial figure pushed to the margins after clashing with powerful interests. During those years, Gibson largely remained outside the center of Hollywood's film industry. Interviews were rare, and many studios showed little interest in working with him again. Yet his absence also sparked debate within the entertainment world. Some actors publicly defended him and argued that he deserved another chance. One of the most notable moments came when Robert Downey Jr. spoke openly about Gibson during an awards ceremony. Downey, who had himself struggled with addiction earlier in his career, asked the audience to consider forgiveness. "I humbly ask that you join me, unless you are completely without sin, in which case you picked the wrong industry, in forgiving my friend his trespasses and allowing him to continue his contribution to our art." The statement received a strong reaction in the room and sparked conversations across the film community. Other actors also offered support. Jodie Foster, who had known Gibson for many years, defended him in interviews and emphasized his personal loyalty as a friend. Whoopi Goldberg similarly stated that she had spent time with Gibson and did not believe he was the person portrayed in media headlines. At the same time, Gibson himself began addressing the personal struggles that had contributed to his downfall. He openly discussed his long battle with alcoholism and acknowledged that his behavior during those years had been destructive. In interviews, he described undergoing therapy and attempting to rebuild his life after the public humiliation that had defined the previous decade. Despite these efforts, the path back into Hollywood remained uncertain. The industry is heavily influenced by public perception, and Gibson's reputation had become one of the most controversial in entertainment. For years, many observers believed his career as a major director might be finished. But slowly, almost unexpectedly, an opportunity began to emerge. Nearly a decade after his exile from Hollywood began, Gibson returned to directing with a project that would once again capture the attention of critics and audiences. The film was called Hacksaw Ridge, and its success would mark the beginning of an unlikely comeback. Nearly 10 years after his career collapsed, Mel Gibson quietly returned to directing. The project that marked this turning point was a World War II film titled Hacksaw Ridge. The story followed Desmond Doss, a U.S. Army medic who refused to carry a weapon during combat because of his religious beliefs. Despite facing ridicule and punishment from his fellow soldiers, Doss went on to save dozens of lives during the Battle of Okinawa without firing a single shot. For Gibson, the film represented more than just another directing job. It was an opportunity to prove that he was still capable of creating powerful cinema. Unlike many major Hollywood productions, Hacksaw Ridge was financed independently rather than through a traditional studio system. This approach gave Gibson the freedom to direct again without relying on the same industry institutions that had distanced themselves from him years earlier. When the film premiered in 2016, the reaction surprised many observers. Critics praised the film's intense battle sequences and emotional storytelling. The performance by actor Andrew Garfield was widely celebrated, and audiences responded strongly to the film's themes of courage, sacrifice, and faith. Soon, award season began. Hacksaw Ridge received 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director for Gibson. For the first time in nearly a decade, his name returned to the center of Hollywood conversation. The nominations signaled something important. The same industry that had once shut its doors to him was now recognizing his work again. During the film's press conference, Gibson was asked a simple question about Hollywood. A reporter asked him to describe the industry in just one word. Gibson paused for a moment and laughed slightly before answering. Survival. The response was brief, but it captured how he seemed to view the industry after everything he had experienced. Following the success of Hacksaw Ridge, Gibson slowly began appearing in films again. He took roles in movies such as Bloodfather, Daddy's Home 2, and Fat Man. While these projects were smaller than the blockbuster productions that once defined his career, they demonstrated that the industry was gradually allowing him to return. Public opinion toward Gibson remained divided. Some critics argued that his past actions should permanently define his career. Others believed that his willingness to acknowledge mistakes and rebuild his life deserved recognition. But the conversation surrounding Gibson extended beyond his personal story. Because during the same years that his career was recovering, a wave of revelations began shaking Hollywood itself. Major scandals involving powerful producers and directors began dominating global headlines. Allegations of abuse, harassment, and exploitation that had circulated quietly for years were finally becoming public. As those stories spread, the film industry faced intense scrutiny about the culture that had allowed such behavior to continue for decades. And once again, some people began revisiting earlier interviews and comments from actors who had hinted that something was wrong inside the system. Mel Gibson was one of them. Years after the scandals that nearly ended his career, Mel Gibson continues to remain a controversial figure. For some people, he represents a cautionary example of how personal mistakes can destroy even the most successful careers. For others, his story raises deeper questions about how powerful industries operate behind the scenes. In recent years, Gibson's name has once again appeared in public discussions through projects that focus on difficult global issues. One example was the film Sound of Freedom, a movie centered on the issue of child trafficking. The film drew enormous public attention online and quickly became a viral topic across social media platforms. Supporters argued that it helped raise awareness about a serious international problem. Critics debated its messaging and the political conversations that followed its release. Regardless of where people stood in those debates, the reaction demonstrated something important. Stories that challenge powerful institutions often generate strong responses. Over the past decade, a series of major events has changed how people view the entertainment industry. The exposure of Harvey Weinstein in 2017 revealed how abuse of power had been allowed to continue for years. The global #MeToo movement encouraged thousands of people to speak publicly about experiences that had previously remained hidden. Suddenly, conversations about influence, secrecy, and protection within powerful systems became impossible to ignore. When those revelations appeared, some observers began revisiting older interviews from actors and filmmakers who had previously hinted that the industry was not as transparent as it appeared. Mel Gibson's name often resurfaced in those discussions. Whether his earlier comments were warnings, frustrations, or simply personal opinions remains a matter of debate. But the questions surrounding Hollywood and the systems that operate inside it have not disappeared. Even Gibson himself once summarized the environment of the industry with a single word: survival. For many people working in Hollywood, survival means understanding the unspoken rules of the system. It means knowing which battles to fight and which ones to avoid. And sometimes, it means staying silent. The story of Mel Gibson is not only about one actor's rise, fall, and partial return. It is also a reminder of how complex the relationship can be between power, reputation, and truth. Some warnings are ignored when they are first spoken. Only years later do people begin asking whether those warnings meant something more. What do you think about this story? Do you believe Mel Gibson was simply a controversial figure? Or do you think he saw something inside Hollywood that others refuse to talk about? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next investigation. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.
Exploring Mel Gibson's journey was a profound experience for our team. This wasn't just a celebrity profile, it was a deep dive into the complex tensions between personal truth and the rigid structures of power. We spent countless hours meticulously scoring archives and analyzing long-forgotten interviews to present a perspective that goes beyond the headlines. It reminds us that his story is often more nuanced than the stories we're told. If you value this kind of dedicated research and independent storytelling, please consider subscribing and sharing this video. Your engagement is what empowers us to continue uncovering these hidden narratives. Let's keep researching for the truth together.